Good morning, my name is Saleh Al and I'm a finance student at Prince Mohammed bin Fahd University. This summer, I completed a 40-day internship at Saudi Aramco, specifically in the Group Treasury Cash Management and Investment Division. Over the next few minutes, I'll take you through where I worked and what the environment was there and what I did day to day, and I'll be talking about the people I worked with, the challenges I ran into, and how I solved them. And finally, what I learned, and what I'd suggest for the program. So without further ado, let's get started. To set the scene, my internship ran for 40 working days inside a single division. In that time, I delivered a presentation to the team every single week. It was 8 in total. And I produced a weekly macro brief that went up to the division leadership. Again, it was 8 of them. Across these weeks, I worked through 6 main analysis topics, from the monetary policy to the foreign exchange and to the liquidity. The short version is that I started out observing and learning, and by the end, I owned the recurring piece of work I reached to many senior readers. The rest of the presentation is how that all happened. So, let's go into my division and my role. Let me start off with the environment. Because it shaped everything else, I sat inside the Group Treasury Cash Management and Investment Division. In simple terms, the division makes sure that the company's cash is available when it's needed, and that it's placed well, and that the money is working efficiently. The goal is that it manages the liquidity and the short-term investment decisions. My own role was the analytical support around that. I followed interest rates, currencies, and economic indicators, and turned them into briefings to the team and leadership, and gave an idea that how they actually could use them. As for the environment itself, it was fast-paced and precise. Because the work I contributed to reached senior readers, accuracy, compliance, and meeting deadlines always came first. There wasn't much room for a rough draft. If a number went into if a number went into a brief, it had to be right. That standard pushed me to be careful and organized from day one. And it's probably the biggest difference from academic work, where a mistake just cost you a mark rather than misinforming a real decision. So I'd like to move on to my internship journey. The internship built up in stages. In the first 10 days, I settled in, completed my onboarding, and ran my first real market analysis. In the second block, I learned that the core treasury functions and began studying the Saudi Central Bank, which is called SAMA. In the third block, I delivered briefings on SAMA and on the currency markets. And in the final stretch, I work on economic indicators and liquidity before wrapping up and handing over. I point this out because my responsibility grew as the weeks went on. I was trusted with more ownership as I showed I could handle. So moving on to what I did, which is basically my tasks at work. So what did I actually do? My work centered on market and economic analysis to support the cash management and the investment desk. Day to day, I tracked interest rates, currencies, and indicators, and flagged the moves that mattered. I helped the desk keep an eye on cash positions, liquidity needs, and indicative market rates. 2 things became recurring. Weekly commitments. The first one was the weekly macro brief, which was a market summary I wrote for the division leadership. The second one was a weekly presentation to the team, where each week I take a topic and present it to the whole team, including the manager and the supervisor and the team members. Alongside those, I researched the Saudi central bank in depth, analyzed the foreign exchange markets, and did a lot of Excel and data work behind the scenes, cleaning, checking, and organizing the numbers that the team relied on. So it was basically a mix of daily monitoring, weekly deliverables, and a deep research project. So I would like to move on to the sixth slide, which is the weekly macro brief. I want to spend a moment on the piece of work that I'm mostly proud of. The weekly macro brief for the division leadership. It followed a clear process. First, I'd collect the data, like the rates, FX, and indicators from Bloomberg and from the desk. Then I'd read the market. I'd work out the key moves and what was driving them. Then I'd distill all of that into a tight one-look summary in Excel and PowerPoint. Because leadership doesn't have time for 10 pages. Then I'd verify the numbers with the team and my mentor specifically before anything went out. And finally, I'd deliver it up to the division leadership. What made this matter to me is that I owned it end to end. And by repeating it every week, I got noticeably faster and sharper at turning massive data into a clear single message. I think personally that's where I grew the most, and I think that's the real responsibility of my work. So moving on to my weekly analysis topics. Here are the topics that I worked in those weekly presentations. I covered the monetary policy and rates, and how the policy decisions change the market. And I also covered the Saudi central bank and its role to keep the monetary policy stable. I covered the foreign exchange, which is how the currencies are priced and why they matter the most to the business, of course. I also covered inflation, GDP, and the jobless counts. These are the big indicators that shape the financial markets, and those matter a lot to Saudi Aramco specifically. I also worked on the cash and liquidity rates. I managed to see the liquidity and see the indicative in the market rates. And lastly but not least, the financial risk. These were the main risks that Treasury watch and how they manage those risks and deal with them. I'd like to move on to the 8th slide, which is the tools that I worked with. The first tool on the technology side is the Bloomberg terminal, which was the most important. That was basically my window to the live markets and the rates and the currencies, and it's standard platform across the treasury and finance. Excel was where I organized the data and actually built the weekly brief using things like the pivot table, the lookups, and the charts. PowerPoint is where I turned my analysis into a clean weekly presentation. And Outlook, of course, kept me coordinated with my mentor, with my team, with my manager, and basically helped me with scheduling. The big lesson here was the good analysis depends as much on organizing and communicating the information as it does on the numbers itself. These tools are just how you do that. Moving on to the 9th slide, which is about the people that I worked with, my mentorship and communication. Of course, none of this happened in isolation. So let me talk about the people and the communication. My internship was supervised by Marwa Al-Hawaj, and I worked with my mentor, which was Jalil Khattab, almost every single day, including the regular one-on-one sessions where we work specifically on my analysis and my delivery. That daily support is a big part of why I improved so quickly, Beyond my immediate team, I made deliberate efforts to network across all the divisions in the Treasury. I'd set up short conversations with different analysts to understand how each part of Treasury fits together. And on communication, presenting every week forced me to get clearer and more confident with my presentation skills. If I had to sum up the lesson from all of this, it would be the line on the screen. The fastest way I learned was to prepare hard and ask questions early. It was never to assume. So asking early saved me from mistakes far more often than staying quiet ever would have. So moving on to my challenges and how I handled them. Of course, it wasn't all smooth, so let me be honest. The clearest challenge one when I figured I pulled the Bloomberg didn't match the number in one of our internal reports. And this was right before a brief was going through leadership. Rather than just picking up one and hoping, I tracked both numbers to their source, and with my mentor I found that the difference was a timing gap. When the internal report was updated, I used the verified figure and flagged it. The second challenge was simply presenting to experienced professionals. While I was still finding my feet, I handled that by over-preparing, rehearsing, and using the weekly feedback to get a little better each time. A third was getting up to speed on Bloomberg and the desk data quickly, which I did by asking questions early and practicing until it felt routine. And the fourth one was learning to decide what mattered the most for our senior audience. So I basically just led with what leadership needed and cut the rest. The common thread was just don't guess, verify, and don't panic. Just be well prepared. So our 11th slide for today is about the degree applied and the new knowledge and the lessons. So the slides bring these three things together. First, how my degree showed up in practice, interest rates and the time value of money, core financing concepts were behind my rate and policy analysis. My financial markets coursework was the foundation for my currency work, and the research skills I built through college assignments let me teach myself Bloomberg and research some on my own. Second, the new knowledge I gained that simply I did not have before. I now understand how monetary policy and the central bank actually shape the economy, how FX indicators and liquidity drive real treasury decisions, and how a piece of analysis becomes a brief that reaches senior leadership. And third, the lessons I'm taking with me. Of course, the analysis that only counts if you can communicate it clearly. You may have an idea, but if you don't know how to share it, it's basically useless to you. The accuracy builds trust with the team, so you verify before you publish. And the confidence really does come from preparation and repetition. So, to conclude our presentation, I'd like to give out my recommendations. So, my few suggestions for improving the program, from what I experienced, of course. First, I'd suggest a more hands-on treasury content, practical work on cash management and liquidity, forecasting the money markets, which is a big part of real finance but only lightly covered in class. Second, more applied markets work using real data. So real exercising in interest rates, FX and monetary policy analysis. And the third and last one, stronger finance technology. More advanced Excel and financial modeling, and we want the exposure to the tools. Thank you all. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.